Good afternoon, my name is Kevin Doucette. I'm an online student at Boyce College, and this afternoon we have the distinct privilege to be interviewing and studying with Dr. Doucette, who is the leading scholar on Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So let's go over and meet her now. Good afternoon, Aria. Thank you for taking time to meet with us. I know you had an important meeting with Dr. Al Mohler. Appreciate your time, though. See, you're pretty exhausted, so I'll take over and look at some of your notes and help inform the people of this amazing man, Anselm of Canterbury. Anselm has been given the title of the father of scholasticism and is arguably most famous for his ontological argument, which attempts to use reason to argue for the existence of God. Starting with his birth and early life, he was born in 1033 in Aosta, Italy, which is a beautiful city located in northwestern Italy. His father's name was Gundolf, and his mother's name was Ermenberga. His father wanted him to pursue a life in politics, but Anselm was a religiously sensitive child and disappointed his father by choosing early on in life to enter into a monastic lifestyle. Some believe that Anselm's father may have been harsh and abusive with him, but this is not a universal view of his father. Ermenberga came from a noble Burgundian family and had a considerable amount of wealth and property. Ermenberga often spoke to Anselm about God and described him in terms of living in a heavenly court on high, which Anselm would take to mean that God lived in the mountains in Aosta. He had a dream that was very informative and significant to him, where he was called to go to this mountain to meet with God. And before he goes, he sees these serfs who were picking corn, but were doing so in a way that was lazy and haphazard. So Anselm goes to tell God about what was going on, to rebuke these lazy serfs. But when he gets there and talks to God, and explains what he's doing there and who he is, God orders for the most whitest and most moist bread to be brought to him, which he eats in God's presence. He is satisfied, and it is better than any bread he could ever imagine. He believes he had entered into heaven, and he began to tell others about this experience. Anselm left Aosta in 1057, and headed towards Bec in Normandy to enter the Benedictine monastery there in order to study under Lanfranc, who was the renowned prior of the monastery and who would later serve as the Archbishop of Canterbury before Anselm. Anselm enters the monastery in Bec in 1060 and took his vows either in the same year or in 1061. His intellect and sincere piety quickly gained him a reputation. In 1063, he was elected the prior of the monastery at the age of 30, after Lanfranc. While serving as a prior of the monastery, Anselm wrote two of his most famous works, Monologion and Proslogion, and in 1078, Anselm took the next step forward and became abbot of the monastery in Bec. The next major step in Anselm's career was where he followed again in Lanfranc's path by becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury. William the Conqueror had established Norman overlordship of England in 1066 and was a benefactor of the monastery at Bec, and granted them lands both in England and Normandy. And Anselm had made 3 trips to England to visit these lands, and on one of these trips, William Rufus, the son and successor of William the Conqueror, called on Anselm to be the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1093, which had been vacant for about 4 years since the death of Lanfranc. He accepted the position of Canterbury under the condition that Rufus would recognize Urban II as the Pope over Clement III, the anti-pope that Rufus had favored. The controversy over the power over the church and the state wages, and Anselm becomes a major figure in what is known as the investiture controversy. And this controversy persisted for 2 years until 1095 the Council of Rockingham, where the English bishops present at the synod sided with the king over Anselm. While William Rufus did come to recognize Urban II as Pope, he fabricated charges against Anselm, and this resulted in him being forced to leave the country. From there, Anselm went to Rome in 1097. In 1098, he attended the Council of Bari in Italy to present his grievances against the king, and at the sessions he also defended the Filioque clause that had been added to the Nicene Creed against the Greek Church. And after the Council of Bar, Anselm went to the village of Liberia, where he completed Cura Deus Homo in 1099. After William Rufus died, his brother Henry I became the new king of England, recalled Anselm back to England in order to get his backing to gain ecclesiastical support. Anselm was exiled again in 1103 for refusing to do homage to the king, but he returned in 1106 and worked out a compromise with regards to the rights of the church and crown in appointments to the church office. In 1109, Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury, dies. Some of his major works, one would be Proslogion. Proslogion, it's originally titled Faith Seeking Understanding. And in this major work, Anselm lays out his famous ontological argument, which Dr. Arya has been helping me understand. On the ontological argument, Nash says, the key to Anselm's argument is his definition of God. And according to Anselm, God is that being than which a greater being cannot be conceived. So the main point of the argument relies on Anselm's understanding of existence, his definition of God, and he believes there are two levels of existence: existence in the understanding and existence in reality. He argues that to be existing in the understanding as well as in reality is greater than to exist only in the understanding. So since God is the greatest being that can be conceived, if God only exists in the understanding but not in reality, then he could be greater than he is. Anselm says, therefore, if that than which a greater cannot be thought is in the understanding alone, this same thing than which a greater cannot be thought is that than which a greater can be thought. Since this is a contradiction, and God is the greatest being that can be conceived, he must also necessarily exist in reality and not only in the understanding. This work also served to establish the attributes of God through the use of the ontological argument. An example of this is the internality of God. Since it is better or greater to be eternal rather than temporal, if God is the greatest being that can be thought of, he must necessarily be eternal. Second major work is Cura Deus Homo, which literally translated as Why God Man? Why God Became Man. And in this work, Anselm seeks to answer the question as to why God had to become man. And the dominant theory in Anselm's day was that Christ's death on the cross defeated the power of Satan by paying the ransom for sin to Satan so that humankind could be free from his power. Anselm rejected this theory and argues in Cura Deus Homo that it was not the devil that mankind owed a debt to, but to God, and that no man could ever pay back to God what he owed him. Anselm also argued that God could not merely remit the debt of sin without punishment or paying/satisfying the debt that was owed. The problem that Anselm presents is that only God himself is great enough to repay the debt, but since the debt was incurred by mankind, it must be paid and satisfied by a man. This is why God, in the person of Jesus Christ, had to become truly man in order to satisfy the debt that was owed to God because of sin on behalf of mankind. The reformers would pick up on Anselm's theory and tweaked it, so Christ's death is not simply about satisfying a debt, but satisfying the justice of God. A main critic of Anselm was a man by the name of Guanilo. He was another monk, and he responded to Anselm's ontological arguments. His argument was found in A Plea for the Fool, and he basically argues that just because he can conceive of this beautiful island in his mind does not necessarily mean that that island existed. Anselm responded by arguing that God is of a different category, since an island is a particular thing and not the perfect being which exists necessarily in reality. So this is the legacy that he leaves behind. There is a plaque outside his house that shows how respected he was as a theologian and great thinker of the scholastic period. Some important resources would be this Church History, Volume 1 by Everett Ferguson, Ronald Nash's Life's Ultimate Questions, the Britannica website and Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, also very helpful, and Readings in the History of Christian Theology, Volume 1, revised edition by William C. Plaisher and Derek R. Nelson. We thank you so much, Arya, for your time. We appreciate all of your information we'll be able to glean from you, and we thank you again.